Hello everyone, this is Christina Barr with Black Tea News, and today we're going to be talking about this video that Ben Shapiro did with Jubilee when it was him versus 25 Kamala Harris supporters, but I specifically want to zoom in on this one particular segment about abortion, and I thought Ben made an argument that wasn't so great, so I just wanted to critique it a bit. But before we jump into everything, I want to encourage you guys to go to blackteanews.com, check out different content on my website, different articles, videos, etc. If you like what I do here, please consider leaving a donation at blackteanews.com/donate, because it does cost a stream, run my website out, that stuff you guys can support. I very much do appreciate it. You guys can also check out different merchandise that's available at the store. You guys can also check out different books that I've written. I've written 18 altogether, and most of them are fiction, but 2 of them are nonfiction. One is Slay Your Fear, How to Overcome a Spirit of Fear. And my other nonfiction book is, of course, God is Blatantly Against Abortion. I do have a second edition that is now out and available on Amazon. So anyway, this is surrounded when there's one person surrounded by a group of people, and they all kind of have there's a prompt, and someone runs for the chair, and they start debating whatever the person who set up the prompt said. And then the people can vote for them to leave if they're not doing a very good job. This particular prompt, Ben Shapiro said that Kamala Harris's abortion practices are indefensible, and nobody really defended her. Because it's presumed that, with good reason, that she is against any limitations on abortion. And someone flat out said that they don't really support it after like 20-some weeks. And someone else said that they value sentience. They didn't say they still wouldn't allow abortions, but that's the route that they're going, and Ben didn't have more time to explore. There was a trans-identifying female who was there who just wasn't even there to really debate. She just wanted to rip into Ben. But there was a particular conversation that Ben had, and he made a point that I just didn't think was great, and that was following the drama with the trans person. Now, with that being said, I'll play that video.
Hi, how are you?
Nice to meet you.
So let's say that I'm voted out by my friends here, and I stand up and immediately collapse onto the ground. Paramedics rush in, and through some magical means, they determine that the only person who can save my life is you. You can do that by giving me a transplant. Mm-hmm. Can you be forced to give me a transplant?
I cannot.
Why?
Because I do not have a parental relationship with you, and thus I do not owe you a duty of care in the same way that I would if, say, you were my son.
Can a parent be forced to give a kid a transplant?
Yes, a parent can be forced to give a kid an enormous number of resources, or should be.
Can you be forced to give me?
So I've heard other pro-life people make the argument that they think that parents should be forced to donate to their kids. Now, there is a difference between a parental obligation and the duty that you have towards your children versus strangers. That's absolutely true. And in general, I think we like to acknowledge that, but for some reason with abortion, we just kind of throw away parental obligations. But to force the parent to donate, that I can't say like I'm really down with. I think there's a better way to go about this. Really, the issue is that this isn't analogous to pregnancy, and which Ben does bring up. Now, you can argue all day long that parents should be donating their organs or whatever, or giving blood to their child if they're in dire need and to help them survive. But to say then that you can force them, as in hold them down and remove it and give it to them, I'm not going that route. Now, I think there could always be a situation where something is dire and the government could decide to make people donate. Like if there was some kind of outbreak and there was only a certain group of people and their blood could save humanity. I think that the government probably would impose you have to do this. And then a lot of these people who are in this circle would probably make this argument if their life was on the line. They probably wouldn't say, well, we have our standards and our morals, and you don't have to preserve someone else's life. We'll all just die. I don't think they would do that. I think they'd probably be hunting them down or marching in the street. And we can look at COVID a little bit, right? People were demanding that you had to get the jab and that you were all killing grandma if you didn't get jabbed, and people were totally cool with the government having the unconstitutional OSHA mandates to make businesses comply. And you might say, well, they didn't force you to do it. They coerced people. If we had that kind of level of coercion that people had with COVID to make women or incentivize them from having abortions, these people would flip the freak out. So don't tell me that it's not the force. And thank God for people like Ben Shapiro on the Daily Wire who actually decided to sue the Biden administration. But it's very interesting. These are all Kamala Harris supporters. Kamala Harris promoted vaccine hesitancy when Donald Trump was the president and they were trying to put out, the vaccine and stuff. But when she actually became the vice president and Joe Biden became the president and they wanted people to get the vaccine, they were all for coercing people. They were all for using the power of the federal government for contracts and you making their employees get in all kinds of different stuff. So it's not really about, you can't tell a woman what to do with their own body, as she will continuously keep saying. They only apply that logic when it comes to abortion. But really what should be focused on is the fact that this scenario they're talking about is a forced donation. And that is really not analogous to pregnancy, not just because there's not like a connection there or a parental obligation, some kind of familial bond. It's the point that it's not a forced donation at all. Like if you are pregnant, likely through the act of procreation that was done consensually, the child exists and you're already donating your resources automatically as a biological process to your child. It's something that's done naturally and no one is making you do it. Your child's not making you do it. I mean, it's just all kind of happening. Nothing is like consciously done. You are not being subjected to some kind of form of violence. It may feel uncomfortable at times, but your offspring is just going through the natural development of life, just as you went through the natural development of life. But the child is in your womb where they're supposed to be. Your womb was created for your child. Your kidney was not created for someone else. Your kidney was created for you. So it's really not the same as someone confiscating your kidney forcibly, and now you're a victim of a terrible crime. You're not a victim of a terrible crime because you are gestating your child. All of this forced donation narrative is just really dramatic. And you can say, well, because you won't allow them to have the abortion, permit them to have the abortion, you're forcing the donation. And how? Like physically, how are you doing that? If you are broke and you think the fastest and best way to get money is to rob your neighbor, is the law keeping you broke because they won't allow you to go rob your neighbor? Is it the fault of the government, them keeping you in a state that you're already in because they won't allow you to commit an infringement against someone else? It's an act of force when you're the one who wants to literally commit an act of force against someone else. If you want to look at all the laws like that, fine. But obviously there's some appropriate times for the government to use that act of force to preserve liberty and to preserve the peace. Another reason why we really shouldn't entertain this forced donation argument is because it really characterizes abortion in a way that's just not accurate. An abortion isn't a failure to donate. And I know that some people look at it like, oh, if I don't want to give my resources, then the baby, that's not me even killing the baby. I'm just not giving my resources. When that's not actually how pregnancy or abortion works, right? So let's say that I was going to watch my nephew, or I had to for some reason, and he's big enough that he can find food around places and stuff. Let's say he comes, I don't really want to take care of him, but he can just kind of find stuff and I don't have to do much. He's just in my space, right? He's in my space. But let's say I decided they don't actually want him to take my resources. I don't want him to do that. So what I do is I make sure that the refrigerator is child-proof and there's no kind of chairs for him to climb on to be able to reach different cabinets and counters, and I put everything away and lock it all away to the point where he's going to be starved to death. If I did that, people would call that murder. There's an intent for the child to not be alive. The intent is just not to have your blood not give some oxygen and nutrients to your child. The reason why you want to block that is because you want the child to not be alive, and then you want to expel them from your body. So there is some malice and some ill will, and there's intent there. And I'm not saying that you have something like personal, like you hate the child or something like that, but your intention is for them not to be alive. That's why you want to deny them the resources, because you're trying to kill them. When you have an abortion, it's through a violent sort of means. It's not something that you make happen in your mind where you're like, oh, I don't consent to have the baby, and they just kind of come out. It's not something you control. And you can't control whether you're pregnant either, besides the initial act of whether or not you engage in procreation. But you don't will it to happen. You don't will yourself to give the donation to your child, to give them the resource or whatever. And they don't will themselves to take it. It's all biological, natural process. There's nothing to really consent to. You don't consent to biological processes. You consent to different actions, like when you procreate, and you can control that. So if a baby is made and it lands in the womb where it's supposed to be, the society doesn't have to consent to helping the woman unalive her child. They don't have to consent to supplying resources like the pills or the forceps or the doctors. They don't have to consent to giving legal immunity for taking someone's life. Those are all choices that we make and we have allowed in this society, but we don't have to. And we can choose to protect life. We can choose to enact justice, but an abortion and just denying resources, that's not something that a woman can just will to happen and just will. That's not something a woman can just choose to do and will to happen, and when she gets those resources, the intention is really to, block the progesterone so the lining thins up so the child will suffocate and starve to death. The intention is to have the dead child, not just to have your resources back to you. You don't always have to gestate your child. That's temporary. Carrying your child, that's temporary. Birth is inevitable one way or another, whether it's a forced birth to a dead baby or you just have the child naturally. So if your issue is those things, give it some time and that'll be the case. If both can live, both should live. The issue with pregnancy is that it is a conflict of rights issue, but you have the mother like pressing up against the baby, and the way to maximize the most liberty would be to, if they both can live, they both should live, because women don't have a special right to kill, just like the woman can't purposefully unalive her newborn. She can't unalive that same child in the womb, or at least she shouldn't be able to, because it's the same human being. Ben's statement is about forcing parents to donate blood. And he's not the only person I've heard say this, and I don't know if it's just like pro-lifers biting the bullet a little bit, not thinking hard about this particular issue, though Ben is a really smart guy. Or maybe he just believes it, but I just think that's a weird take. That's not going to be feasible. I mean, if you think about like McFall versus Ship, which is something that David Booneen invokes when he talks about his pro-choice arguments, a relative who wanted bone marrow, and the relative said, okay, I'll do it. But then he reneged. So he went to the courts and wanted to sue to get the bone marrow, but they would not force him to do it. So people would invoke that. Now people don't have absolute bodily autonomy, and the Supreme Court has ruled that. That's why you can mandate vaccines. We don't have absolute liberty because we decide to limit it so we can be governed by a limited government, but they do have some parameters to limit what we can or cannot do with our bodies. Like I can't, take my hands and put them around your neck and choke you until you die. I can't do that. I don't have that. And if I did do it, there'd be repercussions. So we can't do whatever we want with our own bodies. And just like I can't unalive you, you can't alive me. A woman shouldn't be able to unalive her child. And even if you were going to argue that the child has no right to their resources, which we don't argue that a child outside the womb doesn't have a right to your resources, we would say that doesn't follow that we should grant that the way to solve this problem would be to kill the child. Now, you might say that's the only way that you can alleviate the situation. But again, no, it's not. You can just wait 9 months. If you can't, and there's some kind of like medical issue and your life is at risk or whatever, then that's a different circumstance. But if both can live, both should live. And it just doesn't follow, just because you don't want to necessarily donate your resources, quote unquote, that the solution is to suddenly you get a blanket right to unalive someone.
Blood. No.
Do you believe that the average person should be able to be forced by the government to do something with their body?
It depends what, because that
Why
that
can
is
you
the
not be
nature of
forced
law.
to give me? Why can
Yeah, as Ben said right here, that is the nature of law. There's all kinds of laws that dictate what we can do with our bodies, and not just stuff like ingesting drugs, but a man can't decide to take his body and then go force himself upon a woman. That's not legal. I mean, he can do that, but there's going to be legal repercussions if he does choose to do that, because he doesn't have the right to infringe upon that woman and violate her bodily autonomy. So yes, the government can make laws about your body and what you can and cannot do with it.
you not be forced to give me an organ?
Because I do not owe you a duty of care sufficient to remove an organ
Because
from
you
me.
cannot be forced to use your body to sustain my own. And that is the crux of
Because
the
I do not
abortion
owe you a
argument.
duty to
Because
care.
you cannot be forced to use your body to sustain my own. And that is the crux of the abortion argument. And the problem is,
I wouldn't necessarily say that that's the crux of the abortion argument. There's an argument of like personhood where you'll hear people say it's a clump of cells or I value sentience, and they'll do all these sorts of things to devalue the person. Now he's making the argument that Judith Jarvis Thompson made in defense of abortion, which Ben is going to reference, but he didn't remember her name, but he's going to talk about the violinist argument. But the essay, the point of the essay was to say, hey, no one has the right to use your body to sustain their life. Even so, if they die, they die. But I don't believe that plays out in the real world. And I wrote a pretty extensive, essay about it on my website, blacktnews.com. I encourage you guys to check it out. But I think the premise in the real world just doesn't make any sort of sense at all. And I can offer examples after, they finish their little back and forth.
and it's very morally
You're ignoring the
inconsistent.
parental relationship.
Because there's a point here. There's a very morally inconsistent part to your argument right here. If you do not believe that you should be forced to sustain my body using your own, then you should also not believe that a woman should be forced to sustain a child that they do not want to carry in utero. Is the same basic argument.
Well,
and he's ignoring the fact that Ben has rooted this around parental obligation and parental responsibility. He said, I don't have a duty to you. Someone has a duty to their children. So he's going on a premise that he's not really challenging Ben's worldview on there, because Ben already said you're ignoring the parental obligation with it.
It doesn't matter how you get there. Let's say that you crash into me on the way out of here.
Well, no, it's
if you hit
it's
into
not
me.
it's actually
Yes,
not
it
the
is.
same
But it
argument.
is. If you say
It
that,
isn't,
let's
though.
say that you run into me
Okay.
on the way out of here. If you crash into me, it doesn't matter that is the reason why I am in that state. You cannot be forced to give me blood. You cannot be forced to give me an organ. You
Okay,
cannot
that's
be
not
forced to
actually
use your body
how
to
abortion
sustain my
works.
own.
An abortion includes a pre-existing physical connection between the two bodies. So a better example would be the so-called dead violinist example or dying violinist example that was put forward by a philosopher. I can't remember her name. The basic idea there is that you wake up in a room and I'm connected to you, right? And you have some sort of health condition. I'm connected to you and I'm giving you a blood transfusion. And if I remove that, you'll die. Do I have a duty not to remove it? I think there's actually a fairly decent case that I actually do have a duty.
No, you do
to
not.
remove it.
You do not have
Well,
a duty to be
you can't-
forced to. No,
why are you
because
defining my
do-
moral position?
You do not have a duty to
My moral
sustain
position is
someone
not
else's
yours,
body
clearly.
using your own. Thank you.
He said, why are you defining my moral position? Yeah. So anyway, the in defense of abortion essay, it does include the violinist argument, but that's not the entirety of the essay. There's other examples in there that are kind of way weird. I mean, they're all weird. To me, like the violinist argument is pretty far-fetched. He explained what the violinist argument is. Let me rephrase it for you guys, because I think there are, I don't know how many people really love violin like that, though. Lindsey Sterling is great. I took my sisters to see that, and I did because I had a conversation with my youngest sister about the violinist argument, and she said that she would, donate her to keep attached to them until they got better, hoping that maybe they would play a song on her wedding. So I found out she liked Lindsey a little bit, and so I took her for her birthday. So anyway, and she's phenomenal, by the way. So anyway, let's change the parameters a little bit. So let's say it's 2008. Obama has just been elected. Going home, on the way home, there's an accident. And so I wake up and I'm attached to Barack Obama in the hospital. And the doctor's like, I'm so sorry. The DNC kidnapped you. And now you're connected to Obama. And they need you to stay connected to him until the inauguration. And if you don't, and if you disconnect, if you choose to disconnect, you will kill the first Black president that has been elected to the United States of America. What do you do? What would the libs and the Democrats want me to do? Because I would suspect in that situation, they wouldn't say, it's your body, your choice. I would suspect that they wouldn't, say, oh yeah, that's very sad that happened, but it is, it's totally up to you. You do not have a moral obligation to make sure that he stays alive just a little bit until the election. I don't suspect that would happen at all. I would suspect that people would say, how dare you even think about not sustaining the wonderful Barack Obama? Even if I said, well, I didn't vote for him, people would be, people would expect that it was right and good for me to preserve that life for that long. But the point of the entire essay isn't really to be super analogous to pregnancy, because they actually change the parameters of the violinist argument to test, the convictions of the pro-lifer, and they bring in other scenarios that are very strange to bring other points and stuff. Really, though, if you want to test his premise of the idea, like, oh, you don't have a right to someone else's body to sustain them. I obviously don't think that's true because of COVID, because people thought that you should alter your body with a drug to save them, because they might catch the virus and they might get sick or they might die. And even though they themselves have had the vaccine, they want you to have the vaccine too. So the fact that people were so crazy during that time leads me to believe that the actual theory of the violinist argument doesn't make a lot of sense. But let's use a real life scenario. COVID's a real life scenario, but let's use another one. There was a mother who left her child alone. The child was under 2 years old, I believe, and she left her alone to go to Detroit, I think, and then to Puerto Rico for 10 days. And so obviously the child did not survive. So that mother was charged and convicted for the death of that child. I have yet to meet a pro-choice person who believes that mother had the right to leave that child alone, and we are unjustly holding her in jail or prison or whatever, because she had a right to deny her child resources. She had a right to do whatever she wanted with her body, and she didn't want to take care of her child. And the arguments are like, well, the child was in her care and she should have transferred parental obligation. Well, let's say she couldn't find anyone to take care of her child at the time. And even the fact that you want her to transfer care presumes there that she has a moral obligation to make sure her child is cared for until that moment where the care can be transferred to someone else. So in the case of pregnancy, the mother is the one who has to care for the child, and she ought to care for her child. And there is a parental obligation until she can possibly transfer care to someone else. And in the case of the woman who left her child to die, she didn't, she didn't do violence against her. She just chose to not use her body. It was disgusting and immoral and evil that she left her child alone to die, but she didn't purposely have an intentional plan to kill her. Like what would happen when you ingest those pills for an abortion? So why is it that this woman who chose to do whatever she wanted with her own body ended up in jail for the death of her child? Why do people believe in that situation that her body should be used to sustain the life of her child? Now, people will say, oh, well, that's different because she's she's not inside of the mother. And in some ways, I kind of think that's special pleading, because you're kind of changing the premise a bit. Because the premise is supposed to be no one has a right to be sustained with your body, and babies can't take care of themselves. They need to be held and fed, and you need to gather the food and give it to them and so on. They can't do those things and take care of themselves. So you are using your entire body to take care of your child when they are outside of your womb. So the reality is that this opinion is just garbage. I don't think anyone actually genuinely believes that no one has the right to use your bodies to sustain their life. And you could argue the degree to which someone has an obligation to sustain someone's life. But pregnancy, not killing your child through that time, it's not a ridiculous ask to say, hey, 9 months, don't kill your kid. That's not a crazy request. It's not. It's not too much to ask of a woman, especially because it's most likely that the baby is there because of acts of procreation that were consensual to create the child. I'm not trying to argue that causal obligation is my stance, but I'm just, throwing that out there because that's generally the situation. So anyway, on my website, blacktnews.com, I do go into more detail, going through and debunking or challenging, if you want to say, the essay from Thompson, the violinist argument and all that stuff. Please go ahead and check it out and read it. It's a long read, but go ahead and check it out. But he said the core issue, the key issue of the abortion debate is that you can't force someone to sustain someone else's body. I don't believe that that's true. That's the case. I mean, other philosophers like Mary Ann Warren said that it's really necessary to disqualify the child from personhood, because once you acknowledge that they're a person, it just becomes extremely difficult to make that argument. And so, unfortunately for Thompson, her argument is even if they are human and alive or a person or whatever, then it still doesn't matter. Like, they grant the personhood for the sake of the argument. And again, I don't feel that her argument actually makes any sense in the real world at all. And, the premise is actually really silly, and we don't actually believe it and adhere to it in reality. Now, some people might say, hey, well, we're talking about internal resources. So which to pro-lifers, they'll just say, what if you're abandoned in a cabin and, no one's going to come to you for days and you just gave birth and you start lactating or whatever, and you can give the baby some milk. And if you don't want to do it, should you still, be expected to feed this child with your breast milk, So most people still say yes. So, the internal resources thing, it seems like you're doing everything you can to make pregnancy specific, so you can't compare it to anything else. And so you can grant the special right in this particular circumstance. But the ethic, if it's supposed to be that no one can use your body to preserve their life, that just doesn't pass the sniff test. And, that's what he said. And so that's, as far as I'm concerned, debunked. So I think Ben otherwise, did well with the panel. But I just don't think in general that the government should go to, we should make the parents give the kidneys. What if you got a bunch of kids and they all need kidneys? They all can't get a kidney. So, I don't know if that's just kind of, maybe that's what, some pro-life people believe, or maybe that's just their version of biting the bullet. Like Destiny would say that, you can use, a child as a sex doll as long as they never obtain sentience or something. And that goes way extreme. Maybe that, you can force a parent to give their kidneys is their extreme, but that's less crazy than, I guess, the Destiny thing, I think. But I don't really stand for either, and I don't know, maybe someone can tell me why I'm wrong with that, but I don't think that's the route that we should go. And there's other ways really more effective to argue against his point. So anyway, thank you guys for joining me today. Please go to blacktnews.com, check out different content on my website, articles, videos, etc. If you like what I do here, please consider leaving a donation on blacktnews.com/donate, because it does cost a streamer on my side, all that good stuff. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.